afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the new 8864 Data Controller firmware features and how to use them webinar. Today we have our Senior R&D Manager, Anthony Dougherty. He is going to take you through the latest features introduced in the new Data Controller Generation 2 firmware release and how to use them. With that being said, let's begin.
Thank you very much, Reagan. Appreciate that. So this presentation is a follow-up to a presentation we had a few weeks back about the upcoming firmware release. We actually did release earlier this week on Tuesday, 8864 data controller firmware for the G2 firmware version 702.73. And during that presentation, for those that have not seen it, it should be up on the community as well. We talked about timelines as well as features, and this is just a follow-up presentation to that to focus specifically on the features portion only. And what I'd really like to do is try to make this as sort of interactive as possible and gather feedback from you guys on what you want to see in terms of the features. If that doesn't work and we don't get much traction there, we'll just dive into covering the slides that we had from before. Before we dive in, I'll give an overview of the features, and then I kind of want to open it up and see if anybody has a specific feature that they want to dive into first. Before we do that, though, I just want to say that this firmware release is probably the most feature-rich firmware release I've had the opportunity to be a part of. There are 7 major features in this firmware. Any one of them by themselves, I would consider to be a major accomplishment. And all 7 of them are included in this release. So there is a lot to cover. So trust me when I act like I sound like I know what I'm talking about. But this is all also very well documented in the manual. So if there's anything I cover in here that you want to dive into deeper that we don't get to here, please go up into the community and download a copy of the latest version 702 data controller firmware manual, where we go even further in depth on some of these topics and what these features are meant to do. So let's give just a quick overview of what the features are. You can see that we've updated some things in the GUI on the front panel, some general changes there. We added calibrations to that front panel display as well, which is something I really want to dive into and talk more about during this presentation. And we added some ability to upgrade and keep your configuration. And so really what this would mean is less downtime during firmware upgrades. You'd have the ability to perform a firmware upgrade, and when the system boots back up, your config is already there. You don't have to go load the client and download everything and go through that whole process. We have the ability to also export your configuration. This is a file, a way of exporting your configuration to a file. This is the same file that config compare uses when StackVision pulls over the config to compare data controller configurations. Since we gave you the ability to export, we also gave you the ability to import that back in. And that's what the download XML configuration line right here is for. In page 2 of features, we added the ability to inhibit a startup calibration. The idea behind this would be that this is a way that you can save on Calibration Gas. If you know that you're going to be running an online cal or you're going to start multiple times within a day, this gives you the ability to program a way to prevent startup calibrations from taking place. If you know that you ran earlier in the day and you were online and you've got your calibration for the day and you shut down, you come back online, there's really no need to run that second startup calibration. And so the idea behind this would be you would program a digital to inhibit that startup calibration from happening to save on calibration gas. We also added a way to help stay in control. We'll talk about that some more a little bit later. That's another calibration setting. And with all these new features, we added a way to look at a log for calibrations that shows you how and when channels go out of control and when calibrations were started and how, whether it was started from timer, whether it was started from a dashboard, whether it was started from being manually started. That calibration log displays all of that different information, and there's more detail about that as well. And we made some modifications to some things related to the MDI. That's our menu-driven interface, a number of console tasks, and analog output toggles. And so already within the first 10 minutes, we've given the overview of all the different features. I would like to pause there for a moment and see if anyone has questions or interest in a specific feature that we can go after first. And I'll wait just about 30 seconds or a minute here. Indeed. Dan, you want to mention the poll there? Is that live?
Yeah. Whenever any of you get a chance, in the poll tab on the right, we just uploaded a poll, and we'd appreciate your participation so we can plan production for data controllers in the upcoming year.
I do encourage you all to take a look at that at some point through this presentation and try to give a response there. Any help we can get in planning will help us with production. Remember that the whole idea is to smooth out the adoption curve to make it easier for all of us. But let's stay focused on features for this presentation. I don't see anybody asking specifically, so I will just start to go through them with the slides that I have prepared that we talked about last time. And if there is something specific that you see that you want more detail on or something we could dive into, that's what this presentation is really for. So just feel free to put that in the chat. All right, let's start with some general changes to the GUI. Okay, so here is a page that you would see. Interesting. Here's a page that you would see when you edit a channel in a GUI dashboard. And so I'm going to jump off this screen and go to this screen. And so, for example, here's a dashboard configuration that has some channels over here on the right. If I long click one of these channels, it gives me the ability to edit it. If I'm editing a channel and I click here on the channel number, you'll see that by default, it starts with the channel filtered by the name that's there. We added this clear button to quickly get rid of that if you're wanting to change what your channel is. So I'll cancel that and then come back in. We also added the ability to round to the round precision of the channel. If you want to see your values on the front panel rounded, you can per channel select rounding so that the values that are displayed on the front panel are rounded to the configured round precision of the channel. And we added some colors, nothing too fancy, just a lot of people don't like seeing red if it's just offline. So we've added some different settings. Red if present is the default, that's the legacy setting. You also have the ability to have no color if there's an F flag present, but you're valid. You also have the ability to have no color if F flag is present at all. So if you have an F flag, but you're also invalid for some other reason, you can have that removed. Or you can just have no colors, period, on a specific channel. If you have a channel that really shouldn't have validation. And the idea behind the design philosophy of much of the GUI on the front panel was that it should only grab your attention if it's important. And so if you don't want to see colors on anything, you have the ability to turn that off completely. And so that's, you'll see that on the front panel display, there are a lot of times when things are sort of grayed out, which means they're not really that important. Whereas something like this that's flashing, obviously that is more important and should grab your attention. So those were some of the simple things that we modified in the GUI, just some general settings to update for channels. Another general thing that we changed, you can have different intervals displayed. You can see that this is displaying an instantaneous interval. If I go into his settings and change him to be a base average and save that, update it, I'll instantly get the historical data for the graph and I'm switched to 1 minute. But if I don't want to go through that process of changing the configuration, I just wanted to see the 1 minute, but I wanted to stay configured at instantaneous, we added the ability to where you can just tap on this. So on the front panel, this would just be a tap on the screen. I'm using right now, the view that you see right now is a web browser pointed at the data controller. But you have the ability to now cycle through all those intervals very quickly and easily without having to go configure. So just a nice way that you can sort of cycle through and see what's going on. You'll notice when you come back to the instantaneous, there is no way to query historical instantaneous data. And so that's just pulling from the last few data points that were available. That's all there is to say on that one. Okay, then we get to the big one, the calibrations on the front panel and the dashboard. So there's a lot of information to cover here, but it is all well documented in the manual. It's really relatively straightforward and intuitive if you're used to dealing with calibrations in any of our other software offerings. We'll start here in the top middle. You'll see this E-type start fail runs at. This is what's considered a calibration general. So if we come in here, if we had just an open panel and we wanted to configure, what we're going to configure in this specific zone, you can see we now have these two new options of calibration general and cal phase channel. And this is what we're calling calibration general. It allows you to select a sequence type. And that's all you get to select. And you can't do it on the 3s or the 6s. Those are not allowed. That would be for something like channels. If I had a channel, I wanted to display 3 of them in a zone or 6 of them in a zone, I can do that. You can also display in these individual zones. You have the value to display a value, a trend, a unit, a name, a flag, an interval. You can even display labels. You can put your own custom labels in these individual spaces. So lots of different options with the different numbers of objects. But back over here in the Cal General, you can see that you have the ability to select a sequence. And once your sequence is selected and you've saved it, it will show up here. And what it will have in the top left is the calibration name. In the top middle, you'll have a button where you can start or abort the cal. Of course, it'll only have the abort option if it's running. And over here, we have the status of the last run. And this will match, and also what your status of your pass-fail status of the last run, plus the status of the calibration. And all of these settings match exactly the calibration settings that you would see on this page in the MDI. And so you can see E-type showing pending, and it's a fail with 2 of 2 left. And if we go back to here, we'll say E-type, fail, pending, 2 of 2 left. All the same information as you would normally have to go to the MDI to get. We've now just brought that out and put it on the front panel. So it's easy to interact with. Now, in order to start or abort a calibration, you will have to be authenticated for configuration on the dashboard. Okay, so let's start here on the second row. Here on the second row, we have what is known as a cal phase channel. Now, a cal phase channel allows you to select a sequence and a parameter combination. Once you select a sequence, you'll get the parameters that you can select, and a number of trend points that you want to display, and whether or not you're going to display a trend or detail. And I'll talk more about each of those. So here in the first column, I have 3 different channels. You can see this is NOx, CO, and SO2, NOx, CO, and SO2. This first one is a cal phase channel configuration with a trend displayed. The second column here is a cal phase channel with detail displayed. And the third column, I've got the channel itself displayed as a channel. I long click him, you can see he's type channel, whereas the type left is cal phase channel detail and cal phase channel trend. And what we have here on the first one, currently the calibration is not running. You can see the name of the calibration and the channel in the top left. And I can probably zoom in, calibration name and channel. And you can do the same thing on the front panel. You can pinch and squeeze just like a cell phone to zoom in and out of the view on the front panel. And typically the idea would be that you would set these up once and you would kind of know what's where. But you can zoom in to see if you need to. But if you're using a dashboard a lot, we wanted to minimize the amount of space those were taking up. We don't have a lot of real estate to work with the idea being that most people would know which is in which column and row. So we got the calibration in the channel in the top left. The current phase is displayed just below that. And so the calibration is not running right now. So I'm looking at a historical view, and what it's showing me is the last run of the 0 phase for this particular channel. Now, the background color of the calibration in channel, you can see it's red here. That indicates the worst status of all phases for that channel in that calibration. So, you can see here that this particular phase and channel, he drifted in this 0 phase, but he's red, which means somewhere he failed. And so you can scroll through the different phases of the calibration. And on the front panel, it's really nice because it's a swipe. You can just swipe through them. Here in the web browser, I'll just click on it to go to the next phase. And you can see, yep, sure enough, here I failed in the span phase. I can go to the last phase and go back to the first one and this one here. So here we have the current status of the phase being displayed as well as the worst status of the entire run, all in one short contained small view. Now, this is a trend view, and for a trend view, you see this graph showing calibration results for the number of configured data points that I showed in that edit page, the trend points. And again, standard colors: red is OOC, orange is drift, and green is passing. The trend view y-axis is based off the largest configured OOC or maintenance limit. If neither one of those are configured, it'll scale to the largest value. And if the last data point is off the graph, the text in the middle of the screen will say that. You can see it says last data off graph. Now, I just recently cold started and downloaded this configuration, so I've only got one data point here. You can see that it was off the graph. So actually 2 runs. I have one run that passed and then another run that failed. But it will display by default 14 data points of a trend of the last 14 cals of what this channel did in that phase for that calibration. And you can quickly scroll through a trend of all of them. We'll generate some more data points here in a minute. Let's see. All right, let's talk about the detail view. That's pretty much everything there is to discuss about. And you can see that the maintenance limit is this sort of dotted line, and the OOC limit is this dashed line. Same thing over here in the detail view. However, the detail view is a little bit different. Again, we have the calibration and channel name, and you can switch back and forth between these two by double-clicking on them. So if you only wanted to take up the space of one, you could see your trend, and then you could go look. The difference is the trend shows you multiple runs, whereas the detail view shows you just one run. And so here on the detail view, we have the same thing. We have the current phases status. You can see here's the drift, where we see a red for worst status of the whole cal, and the phase name. So just like the trend, calibration channel, and phase name. And then we have these columns of what the expected configured value was, what the actual value was, what the error is configured at, what the drift limit is configured to, and what the OOC limit is configured to. And this is important if you're using standard or difference. It'll show the configured limit, not the numerical value that you would expect for the error. And then we have this sort of bar graph indication here of where you were. And so you can see in this particular phase, we were right on the OOC line, where it's overlapping it actually. But if we look at the next one, we can see there's our OOC line, and we failed. The biggest difference between the trend graph and the detail graph, other than it only shows one data point, is that the detail graph, this one here, will scale as large as it needs to show all the actual results. It won't show a line off the graph. And so again, you'll see your OOC limit and your maintenance line with your reference here in the middle. I don't know if I missed anything on that. Again, the trend can be thought of as an overview of multiple runs, while the detail is the detailed view of the last run. Okay, so that's what it looks like when it's not running. Now I want to show you what these look like while they are running. But before I do that, I want to point out a use case here that I've had a lot of people request. I've had a lot of requests for this different use case. I think I'll stop here just for a second. We've got a question in the chat there. You guys want me to read it, or?
I can go ahead. Looks like we've got a 5-parter. So First question, are dashboards backed up through StackVision?
Great question. And I do not believe there's any functionality to do that. We do have the ability in the dashboards configuration page to import and export them either to FTP or USB, but then you'll have to manually retrieve them from there.
Okay, next part. Can I transfer dashboards between loggers?
Absolutely. Most of the dashboard configurations are by channel number, but the calibrations are done by channel name. So as long as your channel numbers and names are consistent, you'll get the same results just by exporting and then importing into a different one. It should work right out of the box between loggers. So yes.
And then it looks like you are configuring dashboards through the web interface. Is this the preferred approach or the easiest way?
I tend to find it's the fastest just because there's more real estate than working on the front panel. Um, the front panel gives you all of the same functionality that you see here, but it's all touch versus mouse. I do find it's maybe just a little bit quicker if you can get browser interface to it, or if you had a test logger somewhere, you could set up all your dashboards there and then go deploy them into the field. Um, it's just a little bit quicker than working with the front panel because we have more real estate.
All right. And then what type of abort is it?
Probably your least favorite, the standard abort. So it'll go out of control. There's no option to do a abort without fail. If that's something that would be valuable, we could look into figuring out how we would do that. We'd probably have to put some sort of drop down on the abort to allow you to give you the choice of what kind of abort you want. But it's just the let's see, what is it? If you're in a calibration that's running and you have a board calibration program, it would just be this one here, the A aborted calibration program, not these
Okay.
other two abort options.
Okay. So that answers, can I choose which abort it is when I click it? So there's,
Indeed. No, we don't
okay.
have that ability now. If that's something you find useful, let me know. We can see if that's something we might want to add.
All right. That answered all of those questions.
Okay, so let's go back to the use case. So we talked about these calibration zones not running. Now we can talk about what they look like when they are running. But I've had this request multiple times from multiple different um, parties that are trying to accomplish different tasks, where they say, hey, I just want to stay in a phase. Give me the ability to push a button and I stay in a phase. Well, it turns out that we've really kind of had this for a while. If you look at a calibration configuration and you modify a specific phase, you'll see there's this setting called hold pattern. And this has been around since G1. It's a way to stay in a calibration until that hold pattern clears. And I'm going to demonstrate that on a run here. So what I'm going to do before I start this cal is I'm going to click this hold in 0. What we didn't really have before was the ability to set it up in a dashboard to see it in real time. Now, even in the older dashboards and some of the older firmwares, you could set up, this is just a digital. If I long click it and look at it, you'll see it's just digital 33. I've set my active and inactives, which will control the opacity masks, which one gets applied based on which one is the default, because the default state is the one that's not interesting. And so we apply a opacity mask to that. The active state is the more interesting one, and so we kind of bold it by not having an opacity mask. Again, the design principle being you only want it to catch your attention if it needs to, right? And so this is configured as an output, which allows us to set it. And so we can see that it is active right now. And I'll go ahead and start this cal. And I'm already authenticated because I had to authenticate to come in. So it will just start. And as we're running, you'll see here that it displays the same information that the MDI page, but we have some new stuff. We have a couple of progress bars now. The first one is a progress of the total calibration. The second one was a progress of the current phase. And you can see what happened is it got to the end of the 15 seconds of configured phase time and continues to count up because I'm holding in this 0. All right. And I'm holding, and my last data is actually off the graph. You can see that I'm failing. Okay, here's we roll over the minutes and things will happen and change. We're still off graph, still failing. I don't know if you noticed it. We'll do it again on another run. This said run when we were in the phase but not collecting data, in which case that data will be blue. When we go into data that we're actually collecting, this changes from run to data with a purple color, and the trend points over here switch to the color that matches the status. So right now everything's off graph. It's not very interesting. We'll have to give it about 30 seconds to roll over. And then we'll start to see some data coming in as orange when we hit our drift limit. Again, the data points that are displayed on the trend graph, it will only display the number of data points that matches the number of seconds configured in your data time. So it's only going to color the number of data points that actually affect your result, which is intuitive, right? I think it's what we would all expect to see. We spent a lot of time working with the engineering implementation team to revise this. And so you'll see that this had a 15-second, there was a 5-second data time, 15-second phase time with a 5-second data time. So only 5 of the data points are colored. And these other data points that are older, they're falling off. They're no longer part of the average. I'm now passing, so I'm going to release the hold. And now I've got a drift on my first one, but a pass on the other two. And then we can continue on with the other phases. And so this is a way that you can control the duration of your phase, make it longer without altering your data time, and use it to tune or dial in or for whatever other purpose you might have for using something like that. And so now that we have the ability to see it in real time and control it all in one place, I think there's some real value there. And so we'll let this finish out. This last phase, the data time was equal to the other time. And you'll see that if a channel is not in the phase, it says not in phase and lets you know that. And so now it's finished and we've got some new data. Again, the color of this line will represent the status of the point that it is going to. So here we had a pass point, it went to a drift point, and then back down to a pass point. And so we're drifting, but everything passed. We'll let it run again just to generate some more data, see if we can get everything with a pass on it. We'll just let that crank for a minute. Let's see if I missed anything. Oh, instrument control calibrations. So when we were holding in that hold pattern, instrument control calibrations look similar to that. They will just count up in terms of time. And so the progress bars are intuitive. They kind of do what you'd expect them to. We were considering instrument control cals from the very beginning of the design for this.
We've got another question. Any thought to put something in the details section to indicate that it is evaluating using standard or difference percent versus ppm?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do actually, I'm almost positive we show these with a percent on them if it's a standard method.
Perfect.
Let's see. We go to E-type 0 and modify this to be, let's do NOx. Let's change that to standard. And we may have to refresh. I thought those come across as percents. There they are. So yeah, you can see it comes across as percent in the detail view. I guess because that was historical data, it wasn't shown that way. Oh, and you'll see that the error is infinite there because that channel doesn't have a span configured on the channel. So not a proper configuration for NS type. But yes, it will show percent, and it shows what's configured, not what the number is. However, we do a calculation and evaluate what that number should be to put the line in the proper place on the graph. Yeah, good question. You want to bring up Brad's question?
Yes. Is hold function optional? Those should not count as a hands-off.
Yeah, so that was the very first response that I had from some other folks when we started talking about this. So it's debatable, right? Because you're not really altering the calibration, and there's nothing that specifies how long your phase time versus your data time should be. But is it truly a hands-off calibration if you're controlling the duration? I don't have a good answer for that. We've been debating about that, and that's why I say this would be something good for tuning. If that's something that you have concern with, we should probably follow up and see if we can get a valid answer for that. Because is it truly hands off if you're controlling the duration of the phase? I mean, instrument control cows kind of do the same thing, right? They're controlling the duration of the phase, and that might not always be completely hands off. Yeah, great question, and I'm not. I think it's kind of a fine line, right?
Eric Bowers, in response, said, I could see how this might apply to a linearity. Oops, I forgot to open the bottle, need to hold it for 2 more minutes.
Yeah, something like that. Absolutely. Yeah, I will refrain from giving regulatory advice on whether that's truly hands off or not. Though I will be talking to some folks and getting some more feedback on that, so I can be able to better answer that question in the future.
Awesome.
Okay. You can see that it's running again because I have this set up for 2 runs, and it's on run number 2 of 2, so it kicked off automatically on its own. Any other questions about cals? That's pretty much calibration GUI. That's pretty much everything there is to say about that. And you can see now we are showing the percentage on those guys, whereas he's a drift on that, so he's not showing it on that. You would not expect to see that in a valid configuration. And we're starting to generate some trend points.
I'm not seeing any additional questions.
Lots more stuff to cover, so let's keep going. Okay, upgrade and keep configuration. I think I lost my titles when I pasted from the other configuration. So I will show this. This is version 702.67, and I'm going to go ahead and upgrade that version. You can see that I've got my 702.73 in place. This is the view on the screen up here. We will pull up the MDI, and we will go to upgrade. We'll do our status, system maintenance, download. I have 2 new options: USB download and keep config, and Ethernet download and keep config. I'm going to do Ethernet download and keep config. Am I sure? Yes. Is the file there? Yes, go for it. So now, what's happened is when I hit enter and go there, it verified it had a proper upgrade file, and then it created an export of the XML that is the configuration, and now it's actually going to do a cold start. So the cold start process still happens, but it's a modified cold start in that we retain the server.cfg if you upgrade and keep config. Now, what's happening during boot, and it always freezes at 60%. This is a network thing, so we'll give that. This is not part of the upgrade and keep config. Once it gets to 100%, it will take that XML, generate command response strings, and feed them into the command response string processor. The reason we did it this way is so that we can make changes in the future to our C structures that hold our data and not have to worry about how we transport old configurations to a new configuration. We're still using the same mechanism by which you would load a configuration from a client. And so that has not changed. We're just doing it now all inside of the controller, which gives us the freedom to make changes to the firmware in the future, but also the ability to keep our configuration. Now, you'll notice I did lose my data. The data does go away. There was no way to salvage that. We might revisit that someday, but that was a much bigger can of worms. However, you can see that my configuration is still in place. And you can tell that because I've got things configured. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not showing you guys that screen. Let's get one in here. You can see all my channels are still there. And if you look at the dashboard, and I'm actually going to refresh this, because if I don't, it doesn't like being upgraded. And so you can see when the dashboard came back up, everything was already in place with the channels configured and everything. And so it does all of that behind the scenes during boot. We took our largest configuration, which is a 64 channel 20 phase calibration configuration that we use for our automated testing. That typically takes about an hour and a half to download. And it's really just all the back and forth in the command processing and the latency. That configuration takes 30 seconds to load. Typical configurations take 3 seconds. And so you won't even notice it during the boot process. So, good question.
Does it still get confused and think that it was an online post reboot?
This came up in a conversation recently. I thought that was just a configuration issue. The whole you get a power fail and it looks like a blip and it thinks you've had a startup is what you're asking, right? So I think it's a combination of configuration and also were you able to reboot entirely in less than a minute? Right. T flag happens after 8 hours because it thinks you had a startup and it starts your grace clock. And then your 26-hour clock is already expired. So when your 8-hour clock runs out, you automatically go out of control. I thought that was more configuration based. I'm kind of wanting to look into that more because that seems like something that we ought to be able to prevent from happening. I mean, we have a P flag status before and after when we do a boot cycle. Let me take that as an action item actually to research more because it seems like that's something we could fix in the configuration. We should know if we're doing a boot that we shouldn't, that's not really a startup, right? But I mean, can't you fix that? Yeah, I've been there since the 8816. It seems to me you could fix that with your require full base interval settings. Let me do some research on that. That's the second time this has come up in the past 2 weeks.
Thanks, Anthony.
Okay, let's see where we want to go next. So that's upgrade and keep config. Let's go back to the presentation for just a minute. Okay, so we also have the ability to export the configuration, so we can show that. And this is in BI only. So if we also, I believe that's under status system maintenance, we have the ability to export config. We can select a USB or FTP. I can see this being really useful if you have units that are similar. So I'll export to SFTP, configuration exported, it tells me. And if I pull up my SFTP directory, sure enough, we'll do a refresh. I have to reconnect since I click connect. And there's my config.xml. And talk about that in just a minute. So that gives me the ability to get this XML file and I can move it around, take it to another controller. This is the same file that config compare uses, that DL suite uses. It contains the current configuration construct of the data controller when the export occurred. Now, the export config copies the existing configuration to a file called config.xml to either USB or SFTP. If the config.xml file is already present, it will overwrite it. It won't warn you, it just overwrites it. So use it with care. If you are exporting to USB and a server.cfg file currently exists in the SFTP folder, then that active server.cfg file will be copied over to the USB drive with the config.xml because we say export config, okay? If the server.cfg is already present on the USB, it will also be overwritten. The export config does not copy the server.cfg to the SFTP directory because it's already there. And if we did that, it would restart the Modbus thread. But it will copy it to the USB because we're exporting config. And I keep using quotes on this because this differentiation is going to matter here in just a moment. Okay, so now if we look at download XML configuration, all right. So when you download an XML configuration, it will do the same thing that a cold start does and force you to log in with the I forget which privilege level it is. It's either config supervisor or admin. I think it's admin. But you are required to log in with the same privileges that a cold start requires. And that's because this is going to do a cold start. You notice that when it did an upgrade and keep config, it exported the config and then reloaded it. Well, this does the same thing. This allows you to import a config.xml file from SFTP or USB. And what it'll do is it'll take that file, move it off somewhere, and once you select which file you want, and then it will go down, come back up through the cold start process, and generate the command response strings and pump them into the command response string processor. So this basically does the same thing that upgrade and keep config does, except you get to specify which file you want it to use. It'll ask you a message saying, are you sure, and cancel, and all that process. And if there is a server.cfg, it will still be in place and retained when the process is over. Now, the important distinction that I was making before, okay? Export config, download XML. So when you do this, it's only going to pull the XML. So if you have a config.xml file and a server.cfg file, both in your SFTP directory, and you perform this operation, they will both, your config will be loaded and the server.cfg will still be there when it comes back up, because that's what you would want it to do. However, it does not automatically pull a server.cfg. So if you were pulling from a USB drive, you would need to import both the server.cfg and the config.xml separately. And the names say that, right? They say download XML, they say download server. It's different than the export, because export config, and this is strictly for the USB drive case, copies them both over. You'll just need to import them individually when you're dealing with a USB. So just remember that and make sure that things are where you expect to see them once that's over. Okay, moving on. So now you've got this ability to upgrade and keep config. You've got the ability to export configs and import configs. Well, how do you know that all this stuff is working? Right here, view last XML download results. What you'll see here is the ability to go in and view a file. Now, I already know that this had all successes, because if there are errors, we generate an error file, and the errors are put at the top. You can see there were 260 successes and 0 failures. And here are the strings that it actually processed on the last load. And so anytime I do an upgrade with config or an import configuration for XML, in fact, we can just go ahead and do one. We can do a status download XML configuration, pull it from Ethernet. It expects the config.xml to already be there, so I just have to log in. It will say, hey, are you sure? I'm going to delete everything you got right now and load this other one. Yes, I'm sure. Copying config before cold starting. Thank you, Brad. I think so too. We've used this a lot in our testing. Can everybody see the chat?
Here, I'll send it. Best enhancement. Heck yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Let's see here. All right, so you can see it's booting back up. What we expect is that everything will be there when it comes back up. Let's see if we can get our web view. And you can see dashboard connection error. The dashboard is not responding. And here I had them add what the error was. Apparently this is a 404. It's not responding because the web server is not back up yet. I'm sorry, I thought it was showing the screen also. You can see it's still booting. Okay, so now we're back up, and indeed our web page is back, and all of our parameters are back as well. You do still lose the data, but it loaded that config. And so if you wanted to switch configs, we've used this quite a bit in our testing already to quickly load configs. This is the whole take a configuration as a file and load it. This has been a stretch goal for a long time. So it's awesome to see that we finally got it. I will say I gave a beta copy of this to Jeff Russell. Shout out to him for taking the time to play with it and to work with it. And he did find a couple of things that we do have to fix already. If you're writing to math constants and you somehow write a math constant that's longer than 10 characters, you will get some errors. He had that happen to him. And he went and typed them in, and he can only type in 10 characters into a constant. So we're going to fix that just by truncating those constants. But he also found that he was not able to view his server.cfg that was copied over. So I need to talk about that. You have the ability to go view the results. And what we should see is we should now see another result in that list. And sure enough, we do. And that was the last one that we just did of the import XML. And it was the same config, so same number of successes and failures. Now, these files that it's viewing are stored here in this restore config directory. Okay, so if I go into there, I'm sorry, I disconnected, so I have to reconnect because I did a firmware upgrade, or a cold start, I mean. All right, so if we go into here, what you'll see, there are two different files, and there'll be a server.cfg file here also if there was one present during the upload. This is the command response strings that were processed, and this is the actual configuration XML. And so if you really wanted to, you could go in here, rename that config XML, move it over, and do the process again. But if you needed to dig in and debug, if you do get errors, this is where you can go to pull a file or generate a system report, both before and after. I recommend generating a system report before and after doing this process. That way, if you ever do have trouble, you can give it to us and we can evaluate it, at least initially. We've done this probably over 200 times now on different test configurations, and Jeff was the first one to actually find anything wrong with it. It's amazing how many different ways there are to do things. We never can seem to find all of them.
Got a couple questions. How many different configs have you stored on a logger?
Okay, in terms of like what I was showing in that restore config directory, I mean, so it copies them over here, but it only keeps 10. So once you go past 10, they start dropping off. And these are small files. It's not going to affect your data storage. It is over on the data drive though, but I mean, it's pretty insignificant compared to the size of that partition. And with some changes that we got coming, I think that partition is going to get a whole lot bigger. We're still debating whether or not we expand the size of that partition in G2 or if we only do it in G3. All right, I guess I would question back. You're still having storage space issues even with the G2 data storage size? How much storage space do we need would be my question back. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I forgot to cover. Okay, we did the view last results. Oh, wow. We got 11 minutes left, and I haven't even gotten to two of the other really big ones.
Okay.
We also added the ability to inhibit the startup. Keep data forever. Okay. So here's the inhibit startup digital input pattern. There are two settings that go along with this one. You have the ability to specify a digital input pattern that will prevent the startup calibration from happening and whether or not you want to reschedule it. So I'm going to start going a little bit faster now, but again, this is all in the manual. Let's see. If it's set to yes, an inhibited calibration will continue to reschedule for an hour later for the duration of the grace period. If it's set to no, the inhibited startup calibration is not rescheduled during the grace period unless you have another fully offline hour. And again, with this one, we worked intensively with the implementation team to make sure that this did what we thought it should do and made sense. Part of the reason for this was to give them a better way of being able to configure these things, but also to hand it directly to you where you can go program this in. You can configure a startup pattern whether or not you want it to reschedule. And so here's an example where we had an online startup condition. Gray means offline, green is online. Startup cal was not run due to being inhibited and not scheduled. And so the way that inhibit works is if it's not rescheduled, you know, when you have a startup, if you go offline before you reach your startup cal time, it doesn't run the cal but schedules it an hour later. Well, this inhibit is the same thing. It comes online, sees you got a startup pattern. If it's inhibited and you have it set to reschedule, it just schedules it an hour later until the grace period ends. If it's not, then it just cancels it and it won't run again unless you have another fully offline hour within the grace period. It's not a second startup. You don't get an extended grace period, but it does reset the startup cal. If the inhibit pattern remains true through the duration of your grace period, it still will not run the startup cal. That's the inhibit pattern. The idea being there that you would have a bit that when you finish a calibration online, it sets that bit resets every day at midnight. and that's your inhibit bit that prevents multiple startup calibrations from running within a day. The other setting that we added was the ability to stay in control, online cal at sector OOC. So what this setting does, this calibration will be ran if any data channel has a sector OOC math function value less than the time threshold configured here, and the channel is online. Now, the value must be less than or equal to 8 hours just to get away from the complexity of grace period, because your clock immediately goes up 8 hours as soon as you enter that grace period. So to avoid all the complexities of that, we limited it to be less than or equal to 8 hours. And so there are 11 different scenarios in the manual of all the different things we could think of how this thing works. A lot of really good information. Basically, if you have sector OOC set up on a channel, you don't need to schedule calibrations anymore. It'll just run it when it gets close. Now, that's probably not optimal for when you want your calibrations to run, but in our testing, we never go out of control anymore, except for one scenario that I will talk about. The idea is that this helps keep you in control, because once you have a channel in that calibration that is below, that has a sector OOC math function below that configured value, that calibration will kick off. And so it's configured on the calibration, and it looks to the channels. Now, there's a lot of other stuff I could get into detail here. The interplay of calibration settings, these are 11 different scenarios that are covered in the manual. The main one I want to highlight is, due to the complexity of the interplay of those settings, there are data scenarios where data can still go out of control because we can't program for things we can't control. But even in these scenarios, so here's that scenario that he was talking about where you have a blip, or your 26-hour clock is expired and you had a grace period and you wind up going out of control offline. So here's the expiration of the grace period. It's offline. Red is out of control. Gray is offline. And so we're out of control. The good news is, though, that the sector OC cal runs immediately when you come back online. Some people might not like that, but it gets you back in control quicker, was the idea behind that. Be interested to hear feedback if that's what we'd expect it to do or not. The feedback I've gotten so far is that that's what they would want it to do. Okay, so here's a demonstration of that sector OC. So we've updated calibration statuses. If you're inhibited, it will say inhibit. If the inhibit pattern is true while startup is scheduled, it will tell you that it's going to be inhibited. This is the old startup. This is the new startup if it's inhibited. Otherwise, it'll just say runs at. Sector OOC, here's the situation where it's going to run at the next time. Now, if you have an online calibration pass, this will immediately just reset to, however many hours. If you configured it at 2, then it would be 24 hours the next day, basically. And so this thing just free runs and keeps the calibration running to keep it in control. If you ran all the time, that would be the way to configure this. This one will run at the next online. This is if you're past the threshold, but the unit is offline, because it won't run the cal offline because it doesn't count if you run offline. Here's some stuff in the calibration log. Let's look at the calibration log and the one that we just did to see if it matches up all the stuff that we just did on our cals. So if we go to status, well, yeah, calibration log B right there. Nothing. Oh, I didn't run any because we cold started and reloaded the config. So we'll go back to the presentation. You can see it'll show if it starts it, if it aborts it. Now, the sector OC setting, if a sector OC cal runs and it fails, you don't want to get in an endless calibration loop. So the sector OC setting will be disabled, and that will show up here in the log. If you fail a calibration, the sector OC is disabled because you need to run an online cal again to reset that. And then they'll be re-enabled. That is also reported in the log. We updated the console tasks from 8 to 16 and reserved task 0 for the front panel, so you never have to worry about not being able to access that. And we also added the analog output toggle between engineering units and milliamps. And just a control A on that screen so you can quickly see what it thinks the engineering units are. And we made it with 4 minutes left.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I think you did a great job today. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.